So before we dive into what I actually read in October, yes, October. Dang, I feel like I didn't even, there's no post-it in here. Darn it. Can't say the word sadistic. And The Reclusive Place Where They Lived, which is called what? There were definitely some really, like I said, heartfelt moments. Hi everybody, it's Audrey and welcome back to Chapter and Converse, and welcome to my wrap up of what I read in October. So I'm gonna do the entire month in one video, which, shocker. Also, I read 14 books this month, which, crazy town. I don't think I've ever read 14 books in 1 month, and I feel like it's a testament to how much time I was committing to watching the Mets play baseball, because suddenly I have a lot of extra time on my hands. So, not our season, but that's okay. But I read so many great books, and some of them are a giant chunk of a series, so I'm going to talk about them all at once, but I am obviously not known for being brief, so let's just dive right into the video. So before we dive into what I actually read in October, I just wanted to make one little asterisk. I did finish The Likeness by Tana French on October 2nd, but I talked about it in my September wrap-up because I read In the Woods and The Likeness back-to-back. So I talked about them as like a 2-book series since the characters overlap. So if you haven't seen that, I will link it for you guys, but technically I finished that in October. But anyway, let's get into a different series that I read. So the first books I want to talk about are the series I read, and I will show you all of them. For anybody who's interested. So after all of my blabbering, I finally jumped back into the Kay Scarpetta Patricia Cornwell series. So this is book number 3. I'll go through all the titles of the books, but I have been talking a good game about how I was going to reread all of these books. And when you see my October book haul, you will see I also have purchased the remaining books in the series that I was missing. So we have some of them here. I'm trying to figure out how I want to display them, but this is just some of the books, and then there's some over there, and then obviously I'm holding some over here. So it's 26 books in the series, you guys. I got a lot of books to go through, but I made a promise to myself in October that I was going to read 1 book, get back into the series, because for those of you who are new here, I am rereading the series. I stopped around book, I think like 11-ish. I'm not 100% sure, I need to go back and look. But I wanted to reread the series, get caught up, and I just love Kay so much, and so I started to reread them. So I found a bunch of these on audiobook, which definitely, I would say, helped me read them really, really quickly because I was so invested and I was so in. So a lot of these books have the same audiobook narrator. So I feel like you definitely got into a groove. I will like put all the details down below. And it was refreshing to revisit the series because there were things that I remembered. There were obviously things I did not remember. I was impressed with how much I remembered, and I just got so into it. So I read books 3 through 9 in the series. I read All That Remains. I read Cruel and Unusual. You can see some things are tabbed. I read Cause of Death. These are not going to be in the right order, I don't think. They're in size order on the floor here. I read The Body Farm. These are the UK like reissued covers, by the by. Beautiful. I read Point of Origin. I read From Potter's Field. This was a bit earlier in the series. I don't know, maybe this was like book 5 or 6. You would think I would have written it in there. Book number 6. And then I read Unnatural Exposure. It's kind of shiny. So I'm not going to talk about each individual book because it is part of a series, and obviously I don't want to ruin things for anybody, but wow, 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 wow. I forgot, but didn't forget, but like how great these books are. So it was just so much fun. It was just so much fun. And I feel like one of the best things about discovering a series later in the series is you get to binge them. This to me was like the equivalent of binging a show on Netflix or Hulu or like whatever your source is, because I didn't have to be away from them and everything was so fresh in my mind that even though there were time jumps in the books, obviously, because she originally wrote them 1 year apart, I was maybe jumping, in some cases you were jumping a year, in some cases you were jumping a couple of months, but everything was so fresh, and it literally felt like compulsively watching a TV show. So Kay Scarpetta is the chief medical examiner in Virginia. That is how we meet her in book number 1, Postmortem. She partners with, I want to say he's a detective at the time, because he does get promoted over the course of the books, Pete Marino in Virginia, and she works with an FBI profiler, Benton Wesley. So they become kind of like core 3 characters in these beginning books. And then her niece Lucy plays an important part as well. And then we get lots of side characters. Some people are repeat, some people are new characters that are introduced. One of the things that I love about any kind of series is when a character from a few books ago shows up, and we just get to be kind of like back in that familiar territory with people. And I just think it's great. I just absolutely think it's great. So my advice for anyone who wants to jump into this series is obviously do it. I would also say read it in order, which I feel like is very intimidating because there are 26 books that are out now. But I do think you will miss a lot, especially on the personal emotional side, if you jump around or if you jump in the middle, which is not to say you can't. Obviously do whatever you want to do. But if it was me, this is how I'm doing it. I'm rereading them in order. But one of the things that I also love about this, I'm gonna keep saying one of the things, there's like more things than I even have fingers for, is this book is police procedural, it is scientific, it is medical, and we have the FBI aspect of it. So we have this entire investigative side, but it also is very heavily focused on personal relationships, not necessarily romantic relationships all the time, but the professional relationships that are built between all of the characters, the personal relationships that come out of these professional relationships, family, friends. There are romantic elements that interweave sort of between the books as well, but we really get to see the evolution of how these relationships are built and how love and admiration and respect grows between these characters, and we get to see them struggle with things. And what I also love, more things than I can count, is these books are not there's a leaf blower. Sorry, it's leaf blowing season. Like, I am not looking forward to winter, but I am so over the daily town leaf blowing situation that seems to happen here. So anyway, where were we? Kay and friends. So one of the many, many things that I love about these books is, well, each book we will get a new case in it. As the series goes on, we start to get cases that will span multiple books, that will be referred to in multiple books. So we will get resolution to some things, but not to everything, which I really like because it feels very realistic to me, dare I say. And I would say, like, in particular, like All That Remains, which is book number 3. And again, not going to spoil anything or talk details about any of these books, but the case opens Labor Day weekend, 2 bodies are found. And then we fast forward, we time jump like 4 or 5 months in the book because cases don't get solved like in a 60-minute TV show. And I like that this shows what feels, again, to me like such an authentic timeline on cases. And some things are wrapped up more quickly, some things take longer. But I feel like it is a really solid representation of what goes into the investigations. These books were originally written starting in the 90s, so we're also in a time of fax machines, really waiting for information to come, obviously no cell phones. They start to get cell phones, which is really fun, and they talk about their cellular phone, but they don't have batteries with them and they can't charge them. And they talk about how they get a message from America Online that they have new electronic mail to check. So it's also really fun to see how technology starts to play a part in these as it's being developed in real time, and how those elements are put into the books and how they are leveraged in the books. But what I also appreciate from a personal standpoint of like the personal side of the characters is these are characters who are dealing with really difficult cases, really difficult criminals, and it obviously takes a toll on them. And all of these characters have vices which aren't always the best. They don't always make the right decisions. And even when they know they are not always doing the right things, whether it's drinking too much or engaging in maybe not the best relationships, well, they can sometimes recognize the issues. They don't get solved over a book, or maybe 3 books later, one of those issues sort of rears its ugly head, as it does again in real life. So it feels like very realistic portraits to me, very real people. And I know Patricia Cornwell does an outstanding job of research, of physically doing the things that she has her characters do, whether it is scuba diving or flying a helicopter. Like, Patricia Cornwell herself is absolutely amazing, you guys. And I am just loving everything about these books. So I am still in the reread portion. The last one I read is Point of Origin. There's like some heaviness obviously to these books as well. And I decided after I read this that I was gonna take a little bit of a time out. I will get back into them probably in December, but there's just so much emotion in these books. I have cried while I was reading these books. But there's just, the writing is great, the stories move at a good clip, and it's interesting. I was watching an interview she did with Jamie Lee Curtis for Livid, which is her new book that came out at the end of October, and she was saying how much, obviously, publishing has changed and storytelling has changed, and how she couldn't get away with, quote unquote, writing the books she used to write because they are definitely more of a slow burn. But I like it. I don't always want the mad dash to the end and like these crazy situations and sort of like these implausible twists and turns. Kay is so smart. She solves the case through her intelligence, through science, through putting the puzzle pieces together. And it's not just sort of these weird coincidences or these wild kind of off the walls explanations to things. And not in the sense that I could figure them out, because again, there's a lot of science, which was not my strong suit. But I enjoy it so much from Kay's perspective. So if you are not reading Kay Scarpetta / Patricia Cornwell, highly, hugely recommend this series. It's so great, and I'm so glad I got back into it. So yes, I read 7 Patricia Cornwell books in October. Okay, so going back to the first book I finished this month, it's Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez, and I loved this book. So I would say almost all of my friends. I thought everyone had read it, but it turns out it was Amanda and Krista and Sarah had all read this book, but Lindsay has read Abby Jimenez, and they all just rave about her. And this is my first book of hers that I had read. I've had it for a little bit, and I finally picked it up, and I absolutely loved it. This was just such great fun. And this very much reminded me of the same feelings, I would say, that I got reading Christina Lauren or Emily Henry. And it's like, it's smart and it's funny and it's witty and it's a little bit sexy and there's just great humor to it, but there's also great emotional resonance to it. Totally cried reading this book too. It's such a puddle. And it was so much fun. So this book follows Alexis and Daniel. So Alexis is driving home from a funeral when the book opens, and her car winds up getting stuck in a ditch in this like middle of nowhere town. And she winds up getting rescued by this guy Daniel, who helps tow her out. And they kind of go to a bar afterwards. And it's funny, like the opening of this is like, after a wild bet, gourmet grilled cheese sandwich, and cuddle with a baby goat, Alexis has her world turned upside down. And I was like, I don't even know what this is all about here. So basically they go to a bar after the car towing, a bet ensues, there is a grilled cheese, there is a baby goat, and the two wind up having a romantic night together, and then we kind of get the evolution of their relationship. So Alexis lives 45 minutes away. She doesn't talk about her life. She very much enjoys the great escape she has with Daniel and in his small town, which is quirky and has like a little bit of unexplained magic to it, so to speak, and is not without its issues. And Alexis is just consistently drawn back to this world because she is part of this legacy family. She is a doctor. She has a lot of pressure and weight on her shoulders to carry on her family legacy with the hospital where she works. And she really is sort of at one of these crossroads in her life, trying to figure out what she wants and what's really going to make her happy. And I loved the exploration of where both of these characters were. The dynamic between them is just so wonderful. I love this sort of the family exploration and the challenges and, like I said, the pressure that she's under, and just this feeling of not being sure you are where you're supposed to be, even though you have worked your way towards this path your entire life. And I don't know, it just resonated with me so much, and I really enjoyed them together. Like I said, there were some really funny moments. There are some conversations about abuse in this book, and I thought it was handled very well. And again, it really reminds me of how Emily Henry handles some of her more difficult subject matter in her books. And overall, I really enjoyed it. So there were a few things where I was just sort of like, come on, let's not make these people totally incapable of doing a couple of like basic things. But for the most part, really, really enjoyed it. Like 4-star, very solid read. And again, some really funny moments. I highlighted it, or like kind of tabbed up a bunch of things. I'm into tabbing, it's my new thing. Like the guy in Can't Buy Me Love. I'm into wine, it's my new thing. So I'm trying not to dog-ear my books. I know it cringes so many people. We'll see, I'm probably gonna show you a dog-eared book in no time. But romantic comedy, a lot of heart, a lot of love to this book. And again, people who do not fix themselves overnight, people who do not sort of see what might not be working for them, and all of a sudden everything's better and tied up in a beautiful bow. And it just felt a little bit messy and very realistic, and I totally enjoyed it. Next up is The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield, and we picked this up as Amanda from the Curly Reader and I, as part of a group reading that we talked about during the BookTube Bestie reading retreat that they hosted. And this was a book that a lot of people kept talking about, and it kept coming up and people kept mentioning it. And like a lot of people, I picked this book up because after I read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn, Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, there were a lot of read-alike comps to this. And I was like, ooh, I loved Evelyn, I must have this. So I picked this up probably 2018 and I never read it. So this was a perfect excuse to do it. So all I knew about this was that it was similar to Evelyn in that we had, in this case, a reclusive writer who was getting on in life towards the end of her career and wanted to tell her story to a younger writer, in this case a biographer, and sort of reveal all the secrets and tell the truth of her life. Because much like with Evelyn, people think they know, but they have no idea. And I was like, okay, I knew it was set somewhere in the past. It's not quite clear. I don't know if this is like the 30s or the 40s. We had a couple discussions about like when this possibly took place, and I wasn't quite sure what to expect. What I did not know about this book, and I was so pleasantly surprised, this is dark and messed up, you guys. This is like gothic, messed up family secrets, and people who do some pretty dark and messed up things. I was like, when I got to one of those pages, I called Amanda and I was like, oh my God, I had no idea this was dark and messed up. I'm so freaking excited. So I thoroughly enjoyed this, which is not to say that there weren't a few parts that dragged a little bit. It did get a little like too descriptive in some places. Like I wanted to kind of move some things along. But I was definitely into the characters. I was definitely into the mystery of what the big secrets were. So let me tell you who the people are. So Vita Winter is this reclusive author, and she is famous for her collection of 12 enchanting stories. And she spent the past 6 decades penning a series of alternate lives for herself. So way back when she wrote this original kind of 12 tales, it was originally called The 13th Tale, but the 13th tale was missing. So she winds up hiring this biographer, Margaret Leah, and she wants to tell her the story of her childhood and of her life. So we wind up going back in time and getting the relationships with her sister and about her parents and her grandparents. So Vita and her sister grew up at Angelfield, and this home is just full of dark secrets. And it definitely gave me kind of those Rebecca Manderley vibes to it as well. And I just really enjoyed this more than I thought I was going to, because I did think it was going to be a classic and historical, which is not my go-to, but again, had no idea it was gothic and messy, and it was great fun. So there were a lot of things I really enjoyed about this book. There's a lot of references to different classic books in this, which I am not as familiar with, so I feel like I probably missed some of these clues that were maybe dropped along the way about things. But this was one of those books where I wasn't sure how it was going to end. I had suspicions about some things. I was like right about some things, wrong about a lot of things, and was wholly satisfied with how this ended and what the eventual sort of reveal of everything was. I just had such great fun with it. So I would highly recommend this. And It is not like Evelyn Hugo, but the structure of the book is very much like Evelyn, and I just thought it was great. So I'm glad I read it. Like I said, this has been on my shelf forever. And then we had kind of like a mini Zoom. There were 4 of us, but it was great fun. Talking about the book, just talking about books in general, but I just would highly recommend this one. And it was great for like seasonal as well, because it was just sort of like dark and creepy, like even the atmosphere of it. And I feel like the atmosphere of Angelfield and sort of all of the descriptions of like the current day and of the past were really, really well done. So it definitely gave me kind of like those creepy atmospheric vibes too. So far out of my comfort zone, but very pleasantly surprised. It was good. Okay, something right in my comfort zone is How to Survive Your Murder by Danielle Valentine. So I talked about this in my most anticipated releases of, I want to say September. I bought this in October. This was one of those things where I was like at the bookstore and I kind of kept circling the table and I didn't know, and then I wound up buying it, and I'm so happy that I did. So this is a YA horror mystery thriller. And if you are a fan of slasher films, particularly Scream, I would highly recommend this book because there's so many winks and nods and like straight up references to the movie that it just felt like one giant Easter egg mashed up in like a really, really fun story. So this one says, rule number 1, never go in the corn maze alone. Rule number 2, nothing good happens on Halloween. Rule number 3, never be distracted by a hot bad boy. Rule number 4, don't die this time. So this is a bit fantastical. So when the book opens, it is Halloween night last year, and Alice and her older sister Claire and Alice's friends go to this big party in town, which you have to go through a corn maze to get to the other side where the party is taking place. And Alice is not really one for the parties, but her older sister brings her, and she's like, you have to go, it's gonna be great fun. So not so much for Claire because she winds up getting murdered by a guy with a chainsaw when the book opens. And Alice is the witness to the murder. So we then fast forward a year. It is the day of the murder trial is about to start, and Alice is going to testify. And she winds up meeting this girl who looks like Sidney Prescott from Scream, stay with me, who is sort of like, maybe you fingered the wrong guy, which is very Scream for those of you who know what Scream is all about. And she winds up getting knocked out, Alice, and then she wakes up on Halloween last year and gets to relive it all again and tries to save her sister. So knowing what she knows now, she applies it to a year back. This is not one of those annoying Groundhog Day books where like she keeps reliving the same day over and over. It takes place over the course of one night, and I had such great fun with it. Suspects, questions, so many great horror movie references, and I did not see the ending coming. I didn't. Maybe I should have. Maybe I don't even know. I'm not mad that I didn't see it coming. There were things I was suspicious about. Again, right about some things, totally wrong about some other things. And I loved how this book ended. I thought it was just such great fun, compulsive, fast read. This was definitely perfect for October and Halloween time, and I also think you could read it anytime, but it was such great fun. She has written a whole bunch of books. I was not familiar with Danielle Valentine, but she has also written under the name Danielle Vega and just has an absolute smattering of books that are out there, but super great fun. I just was in such a horror slasher kind of a vibe also, which I'm going to carry into November with my reading, but love this one big time. I read all of one dark academia book, and I have to say I'm glad I picked Stargazer by Laurie Petro because this was so good. This is one of those books where when I was doing my dark academia research, this book popped up on a list, and it hadn't come out yet, and it is a Canadian author, and I found it on Book Depository. It's dog-eared a lot. So remember when I was like, I'm not dog-earing anymore. I'm doing a little bit of both with this one. Couldn't decide, obviously. Started dog-earing. I don't even know what's going on with me. But I wound up grabbing it. And what grabbed me about this book, what grabbed me about the book, is it's the summer of 1995, which I was like, okay. And we meet these two girls who are neighbors but have never been friends before when they are kind of the summer from junior year to senior year in high school. And they wind up becoming friends, and like that fast kind of obsessive compulsive female friendship that happens, and they basically decide to go to college together, to live together, and they just become completely intertwined with each other. And obviously that's not always the healthiest thing to do. And we get to see their lives together and the decisions they make. We kind of go a little forward and backward in time over this kind of 2-year time frame. And we just get to see kind of that dark and messed up side of female friendship that I love so, so much. It's like absolutely one of my favorite things to read about. So this story is about Diana and Ariel. So Diana has always lived in the shadow of her sadistic older brother. He is not a good dude. And she basically doesn't have a lot of friends, kind of quietly hangs out at home. And she looks out her window and she watches the family next door, who are the Taylors. And the matriarch of the family is Mariana Taylor. She is a celebrity fashion designer. She has a couple of boys, and then she has her daughter Ariel. And Diana is just enthralled with this family and with Ariel. And when they have an opportunity to become friends, it becomes sort of this weird like admiration and envy and need for each other. And they each get things from each other that they've never been able to get from anybody else. And it becomes a bit codependent and a bit unhealthy. And we get to see how this relationship kind of spirals and sort of how it impacts everything else in their lives. So they wind up going to school together, and it's just really, I feel like, such a great slice of what it was like in the mid-90s, and I feel like it really captures that moment really well. And I feel like she does a great job again capturing these female friendships. It definitely reminds me of The Girls Are Also Nice Here by Laurie Elizabeth Flynn, and sort of again that dark and messed upness between the girls. And reading some comments from Laurie Petro, she talks about how The Secret History is like her favorite book ever, and it's like same. And she wanted to write not her version of that story per se, but sort of her love of that book and her love of dark academia, and write her own dark academia book. And I really, really loved it. I think the language is beautiful in this. I think the writing was great. There's so many beautiful lines. And for me, it just felt like so much relatability to so many different things that were said and done in this book. And it's definitely a lot of darkness. And it felt very raw and very honest, and again, very messy. I love me some messy characters. And another book where I just absolutely loved how it ended and was wholly satisfied with how this story was told. So I was not familiar with Laurie Petro. This is her 4th book, so I'm definitely gonna have to give a look-see about some other books that she has written, but I think she's one to, I don't wanna say like one to watch because that makes it sound like she's a debut author, but one to look out for. How about let's go with that? And also I love this cover so much. It also gives me like all the 90s like raver vibes. I just love it. I had such a good reading month, you guys. Okay, next up, I also finally read The Lazy Genius Way by Kendra Adachi. So I have followed Kendra on Instagram and online for a while, and I of course bought this book a while ago and I didn't read it, but I have been definitely feeling really out of sorts lately. And like I can't focus, and I can't get organized, and I can't productively get stuff done, and I can't efficiently get stuff done. And I feel like what used to work for me isn't working for me anymore. And there were so many like little tips and tricks that I got from Kendra just following her on social media, and I was like, I need to actually read this book. So I read this cover to cover before I'm gonna go back and really start implementing different strategies and things. I highlighted this book a lot. I feel like this will give people so much anxiety, but there's so many great takeaways in this. This is also one of those books, like there's highlighting and tabs and dog earing happening here. This book is also really funny. She has such a great kind of dry humor and wit to her. And it's like having your best friend talk to you. It's one of those kind of books. Totally relatable, totally easily consumable, totally easy. So what I love is that she doesn't give you like a 10-point bullet list of like, do these 10 things in this order and that's how you're gonna be successful. She talks about her process, and she talks about how to develop a process, but how it's so unique to each person. And I feel like I'm saying things that people are probably like, Audrey, this is not revolutionary information. And it's not, but it was also so helpful, and I feel like it's packaged so well. And there's just little nuggets of like good advice and sort of reinforcement and cheering, and just a feeling of like, it's okay to be messy. It's okay to not do all the things, and that you have to be in touch with, you know, your season and your reason, and figure out what matters for you and focus on that. And what works for me won't work for you. And sort of this idea of like trying to mimic other people's routines and other people's lives that works for them. And it's okay if you're not the 5 a.m.er and you're not going to journal every day and you're not going to meditate every day and sort of all these things that these successful people tell you to do for your morning routines. And it's okay to not do those things, and it doesn't make you a bad person, and it doesn't make you not be a successful person. So I just really enjoyed, not that it lets you off the hook, but like it kind of lets you off the hook, because I am certainly guilty of watching other people's routines, trying to mimic them to help figure out what's right for me, but also definitely feeling some guilt if I'm not doing all the things well, or not doing all the things right, or not able to accomplish these 10 things before 8 a.m. like all these other people say that they do, and maybe they also do. And if that's not right for me, it's definitely one of these books where it's like, you need to know who you are and you need to be true to yourself. And I feel like as we get older and wiser, and I was talking to somebody in my comments about this too, and I was like, it took me a really long time to figure this out, because I talked about it in that book unhaul video that I did when I was letting go of the home edit. Like, life is too short to try and be somebody that you're not. And I am definitely guilty of having tried to be somebody else to try and figure out who I was. And I think it just takes a really long time to be comfortable with who you are. Or it does for me, at least. If you have figured it out, more power to you. I had not, and I still have a long, long journey to go. I'm trying to find like some brilliant takeaway that I can say, but it's like, what can I do now to make my life easier later? And it also talks about embracing the power of small steps. I really like this because this is one of those things that I struggle with. And it's like, if I can't do the whole project, if I can't dump, organize, donate my entire closet, it's just not worth it to me. I'm not gonna do it at all. If I can't do it all, I'm gonna do none of it, which I realize is not the best approach to things. And I also follow Erin, who from Style Thief Fashion online, and she in particular like talks about like your closet and curating things and all of this. And it's not about like you need 5 black shirts or you need this, that, and the other thing, but like do one shelf, like do one thing. And like that concept of like one drawer, one shelf, and do it in smaller pieces. I am very prone to the overwhelm, and I am very prone to self-sabotaging through the overwhelm. So again, it just feels like a little bit of letting me off the hook and trying to get unstuck. So it says, not caring and caring too much leave you in the same place, stuck. And I'm really just trying to get unstuck because I feel very stuck. So that was today's psychology therapy session, and I just highly recommend this book to anyone who's just looking for some great advice. It's not preachy, it's not condescending, it's not soapboxy. Like I said, easily digestible, easily accessible. She's a riot. Her Instagram, all the things are really, really great. And I'm a big fan. So I'm definitely one of these people now who is gonna lazy genius things and talk in lazy genius speak, and I'm not mad about it at all. So I'm so happy I finally read this book. It was so good. And finally, I would be hard pressed to pick a favorite book of the month, but if I had to, one of my most favorite books of the month is Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney. I finally read it, you guys. I started this, I read the first chapter like right when we slipped into series September. And then, if you guys know, you know, I went series whole hog in September and loved every minute of it. But then I was like, I need to read this book. It is seasonal. This also takes place on Halloween. And I just was desperate to read it because I love Alice Feeney and I just wanted to read it. So I did, and I loved it. So I mentioned in my October wrap up that I let myself be spoiled for a book, and this was the book. And I take full responsibility for my actions. You guys know I have very strong feelings about people spoiling books. I have very strong feelings about certain reviewers that I no longer feel I can trust will not spoil a book. So I will skip past some of their content if it's a book I haven't read yet and I want to read. And I was watching a YouTube video. I had it on while I was cleaning and doing some stuff and was not paying attention, and they started to talk about Daisy Darker and spoiled something. And I was furious because I was, I don't know, maybe like 3 chapters into the book when that happened. So I called a friend of mine, and I don't even want to like hint at anything, but I was just like, this is what I just did, and I'm really, really mad at myself. So here's what I'm gonna tell you. This is Alice Feeney's version of And Then There Were None. We have the isolated, island of sea glass where the Darker family is reuniting for Nana's 80th birthday. And when the tide comes in, they are completely cut off from the outside world. And everybody gets there and the tide comes in, and sure enough, somebody dies. And I loved it. I absolutely love this book. I love the characters in this book. I love the reveals of this book. I love how it was written. I have been a fan of Alice Feeney since her first book, and I really feel like she is one of these authors who came out swinging and continues to elevate her game in her storytelling, in her language, in her characters, in her creativity. I don't know that I would have come to certain conclusions had I not been spoiled for something. I was so into this book. I didn't dog ear, I tabbed because there's no way I was gonna dog ear this book. So many pages, there were just so many beautiful lines to this. So we know from the start that Nana has made a career as a writer, so there's so much commentary on being a writer. That plays like just an important part in the storytelling, in that there's like so many great quotes and references to writing and the writing life, which I think I also just gobbled up to pieces because obviously it's me, but I just loved it so much, and I just highly recommend it. I think she's so gifted. I think she's such a great writer. Like I said, I've read all of her stuff. His and Hers has been my favorite book. I would tie it at first place with Daisy Darker, and it just operates on a completely different level in some ways, but also just so spectacular. And I also love that her books can be so different, but you know you're in an Alice Feeney book, but she doesn't do the same thing twice. She doesn't have the same story structure twice. She doesn't use the same tropes over and over again. And I just loved it. I just absolutely loved it. So if you are sleeping on this book, wake up. But read nothing about it, but just read the book because you won't be disappointed. So that's gonna do it for everything that I read in October. I hope you guys had a great reading month. I definitely helped fill my Booktober bingo board. I'm not quite sure where I'm gonna slot all my Patricia Cornwells. Right now I have like multiple books sitting under series. I'll pop up a update for you guys, but I'm gonna sort of reserve the right to be able to move stuff around as we go. I will fully admit I did not really enter October picking books based on the squares. I just sort of read what I felt like reading, and I did not expect to make that hard left into the Patricia Cornwell world, but I'm not mad about it. So I'm gonna try and laser focus a little bit more on my actual squares going forward. But I hope everyone had a great month. If you're playing bingo along with me, thank you, and I hope you guys are having a great time. I've seen a whole bunch of posts on Instagram, which gets me so freaking giddy. And November reading is definitely a little bit slower. It's National Novel Writing Month. I expected I was gonna slow down a bit. I finished 2 books. I have 2 in progress. We'll see where we land. But for now, all is good. All is good in the world. So thank you guys so much for hanging out. I know it was a doozy today, and I really appreciate you guys being here. And I will see you guys in another video really soon. Bye, everybody.